Welcome to the Great I.O. Get-Together. On tonight's show, quips and queries about the world of work as I.O. psychology comes alive. Now please welcome our hosts, Richard and Tim.
Welcome everyone to Great I.O. Get-Together number 40. My name is Richard. This is my co-host Tara. Today we are exploring chapter 14 of our textbook, Research Methods for I.O. Psychology, and this chapter is all about developing and sharing the results of research with others. So to help us share our research meaningfully, on the show today, we have Dr. Tammy Allen, Distinguished University Professor of Psychology at the University of South Florida. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be with both of you.
So I really love the idea of focusing on practical relevance, and it's something that I think a lot of people aspire to, but they didn't know that the field appreciated that kind of research. Do you have any advice for authors about how they can conceptualize and execute their research in a way that's more likely to lead to usefulness?
Yeah, I think it all starts with the question. Will this question address an issue that leads to a better understanding of phenomena at work, how it might meaningfully change how work is designed, managed, or experienced? And in the inaugural editorial that was published, we tried to parse this out into three different aspects of research. One is the ideas, problems that matter for work, workers, organizations. The evidence, do the methods enable that question to be soundly answered? And then what impact will the research have? What decisions, practices, or policies might be informed or changed by the research? So I think when it's clear about what might actually happen, that usefulness really follows more naturally when you attack the research from the start, thinking about ideas, evidence, and impact.
In the world of software development, I always laugh because I think a lot of people want to develop an app just to make the world better, but they don't have a lot of life experience. And so the kinds of problems they focus on are pretty narrow. It's like the kinds of problems somebody who was raised affluent and maybe Uber for dogs is something useful. But do you think that also applies to our world? Like, do you have to get out into the world to know what kinds of problems might be worth solving? Or is this something that you can figure out by reading the New York Times? So what's your sense of like the usefulness or importance of those real world experiences?
Yeah, I think it's really important to read widely. And I mean, that may include the New York Times, read widely, talk to a lot of different people. If we're stuck in the lab in front of our computer, we're not able to see the sorts of things going on around us, like you mentioned, Tara. You know, one of the other things that we're doing at the journal is we've developed an advisory board of really outstanding practitioners. So this was done as a way to try and generate some of those conversations. Another way to try and connect the science community with the practice community so that we can be generating the types of questions and doing the types of research that's really mattering to people in the trenches, so to speak, today.
I really love that you have that advisory board as just a mirror to whether the things that we think are important and useful really are. And I think it's really great. So your own work as a researcher has been really influential, both for organizations, but also for policymakers. Do you have a favorite paper that you think has been influential in a way that you are really proud of or fond of, or maybe a favorite example of how your work has been applied?
My answer to that question would probably vary from day to day, given some of my current work on remote and hybrid work issues. I published an article in Psychological Science in the Public Interest in 2015. It was a big review of telecommuting, back when remote and hybrid work arrangements were referred to as telecommuting. And it was published with one of my research besties, Kristen Shockley, and with Tim Golden. And that journal is intended to publish work that can inform policy. And so the process of doing that review and reading very widely across a variety of fields so that we weren't just speaking to psychologists really informed the way I think about doing research that can inform policy. And it's been very widely cited, which is gratifying, but isn't what really matters. It's the different outlets that are citing that work, from public policymakers, researchers in a wide variety of fields, as well as research and consulting firms. I'm happy that many of the conclusions that we came to in that article are making a difference for how companies are thinking about the application of telecommuting and remote work today.
Yeah, that's such a good example. And I think you're right that the ultimate mark of impact is that it leaves the bubble of psychology and gets picked up by people in political science or economics as an important idea. And it seems to me like psychologists don't get a lot of training in how to engage with those other disciplines. Like talking to an economist feels like a really hard challenge because they maybe don't have fluency with some of those ideas. Is that just an inevitable part of PhD training that you have to get really narrow, or are there things we could do better to better? I mean, based on your experiences, like what are things that people could do to better communicate with those audiences?
Yeah, that's something we've actually been trying to do with the journal and with our graduate students is give them practice in translating our science for people outside of our science. We're involved more in communicating via social media, articles that have been published in personnel psychology. In my graduate course, one of my assignments for students is to take a body of work or an article and translate it in a way that it can be understood and picked up by others outside of IO psychology.
Remembering that communication is a two-way street is really important here too, right? So we're communicating outwards. We also need to be good listeners and keeping track of what other disciplines are talking about. It might feel like a huge challenge just given how complicated the world is and how many voices there are, but I think that's an important part of translation too, right? Is hearing what other people think is important and how they're using these ideas and how we can potentially build and say, well, the psychologists can offer the mechanisms, or we can, offer insight into people's perceptions and fit it into where the conversation already is.
When designing a research project, that research project can be impactful, but it's really hard for any one study to make a difference for policy. And for policy, you really need to think about the accumulation of evidence. And so that's where each study can be a building block to informing policy. And that's where I think we get a little too caught up in the idea that this notion of what's incremental science versus something that's novel and changes conversations. We need these building blocks so that we can accumulate the evidence in a way that is programmatic and can inform policy. We don't want to make big decisions typically based on the findings from a single study. We need a body of evidence.
That's hugely important. And I think that idea is one that gets distorted a lot. That what does it mean to be novel? What does it mean to make a contribution? People really misunderstand what that means. And I think on the policy side, we also have to be good coaches and discourage people from getting too excited about one paper, right? And say, like, let's think about this paper in the context of everything that we know. And what does a reliable body of evidence look like? I mean, that's not something that most policy aides are really thinking about unless we help them do that. So let's talk about the journal some more. Maybe for beginners, brand new beginners, walk us through the process of publishing a PSych article from beginning to end. So what happens, I go into the journal system and I upload my paper and I hit submit. What happens to it after that? Who are the people involved? What are their roles? How are they chosen? What are their powers? Can you walk us through?
After you hit that submit button, there's an administrative process in the sense that a managing editor we'll go through the manuscript to make sure that the formatting is the way it should be. Before there's this pre-processing, if you will, and then it gets sent on to me. And what I do then is review each submitted article for scope and whether it fits the mission of the journal. And if it doesn't, it's just rejected. And we think that's a kind way to deal with that research rather than having it go through the review process and not get a decision until months later. If it fits the mission scope, and I pass it on to one of our AEs, and I do that thoughtfully in the sense that I identify the AE who seems to have the expertise most closest to the topic of the article submitted. And then the AEs determine, they also have the power, if you will, to just reject an article. They may be closer to that topic. It may feel like it doesn't necessarily fit the mission of the journal. Otherwise, they will go ahead and send it out to reviewers. And as a team, we've also had conversations about how important it is to match reviewers carefully as well. We want to make sure we get the best reviewers, the reviewers that have the greatest potential to love that article that has been submitted. And then the reviewers review and submit their reviews, and then the action editor makes a decision. And it's important to note that our action editors are not review counters. Reviewer counters. They're not, they have the autonomy to make a decision that may be counter to the recommendations of the reviewers. But they use the reviewer information to make that decision, which then gets passed along to the authors. And if there's a revision that's requested, we go through the process again.
I always am surprised at, one, the beliefs that people have about how the process works and how they might be incorrect beliefs sometimes. But then two, the areas where there's variation from journal to journal, and you really do need to discover, like, is the editor-in-chief handling every paper, or the ad hoc reviewers members of the editorial board? These are things that I think do differ from place to place, and it's helpful, I think, to have a picture of the whole scene.
And we use two reviewers, right? One of those points of variation is the common use of 3 reviewers versus 2 reviewers. Mm-hmm. I prefer 2 reviewers to 3 reviewers for making decisions even. I don't find, generally speaking, that 3 reviewers helps inform decision-making. And as an author, do you want to respond to 2 reviewers or to 3 reviewers?
We've all had 100 pages of comments to respond to, and nobody wants that. Right. Have you run into, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but have you run into any problems with reviewers using AI to complete their reviews? And if so, how are you handling that?
We don't have ways to detect whether or not that is the case. The policy is such that articles should not be submitted to AI, that's the intellectual property of the authors. So we have, that is the policy, the publisher's policy of the journal. And I think that's the case for most publishers that I'm aware of. Unless there are new ways to detect that the two of you may be aware of that I'm not, we can be suspicious that may have occurred, but we don't have a way to detect it.
Yeah, it's something to prove, but I do feel that there are indicators that maybe the review was not fully human created, and I wonder what that does to the field and the credibility of the field over time. I mean, certainly computer science is at a crisis because of this issue, and it would be, I think, an even more serious problem if our field ran into the same situation. So it's definitely something that's been on my mind. I have no magic solutions, unfortunately.
I mean, I can say as an author, I've received reviews where I thought, oh gosh, this was AI generated. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what it is that gives you that sense. And the issue is not only with reviews, but with papers that are submitted as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I have a very strong sense of it, but couldn't tell you why in terms of a checklist, which makes it harder to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Maybe you can tell us what are the conversations like at the journal about open science?
We are of the mind that we want to we encourage open science practices. It's important for the credibility of our field. It's an important aspect of the stewardship of our science. But we're not mandating specific open science practices. And a big reason behind that is that we really want to attract work that involves data from organizations, and that type of data may be proprietary, or there may be aspects of that data that can't be shared. So we really want to encourage all the open science practices where possible, but don't feel comfortable mandating something like that along the lines of sharing the data. Now, sharing code, sharing study materials, all of that is strongly, strongly encouraged.
It would certainly discourage people if they were required to share the data. I do wonder about the various differential privacy tools where you're generating a data set that acts like your data but isn't your data, and how organizations would feel about that. But I think that's often, I mean, there are often so many layers of caution and ordering and paranoia that organizations have that would still be really difficult to navigate.
Members of the team had some specific examples, and we didn't feel comfortable issuing a mandate that not everyone could adhere to.
Okay, let me shift to talking about your own journey a little bit. When you think about your own mentors and the people who have shaped the way that you approach research, who are some of those people, and maybe some of the lessons that you've taken from those mentorship experiences?
I'd say it really started with my own work experiences. And before I started graduate school, I worked for a period of time at an insurance company, and I had some really great bosses, and I had some not so great bosses. And part of that really got me interested in IO psychology as well. And I was really fortunate to have a fantastic IO psychology professor, Ron Riggio, who was at Cal State Fullerton at the time. And I started working in his lab. And I was a first generation college student. I had no idea what graduate school was. And Ron opened those doors, so to speak, and I fell in love with research. So and it's funny because I've told him this, and I'm just one student in thousands and thousands of students, and how you can really make a difference in one person's life when you don't even realize it, just by being a caring professor that sees something in someone and helps encourage them. And I think that also inspired some of my research on mentoring as well. And, I had lots of great mentors in graduate school. I had a wonderful experience in graduate school. I had met my husband in graduate school. I met my research bestie, best friend for life, Lillian Eby, in graduate school. I tell students to really appreciate the people and the relationships that you develop in graduate school as well. And so much of the work that we do is through these relationships that we develop. And so not only just in the sense that they may be your research collaborators, but friends and people that you can call upon throughout your career as well. The other thing I will say is that I really believe in coursework. That may not be a popular take, but we took a fair number of courses at University of Tennessee, rest in peace, IO program. But that really provided exposure to all the different faculty. So it's not necessary for people to develop research studies with all the different faculty to learn from them. You can learn so much about their different approaches to teaching in different areas of study. So I embrace that model of having courses and learning from the various faculty through those courses and developing research ideas through those courses as well.
It's incredibly wise, and as the world authority on mentoring, I think your perspective here is very valuable. I really think the point about just connecting with as many kinds of people as you can is so important, because you do take something different from each of those relationships, and it shapes the kind of work or the trajectory that you might find yourself on. And I always feel when I see someone who's just sort of only worked in one lab or only one context with only one set of co-authors, that they're missing out on something really important that would take their thinking in a different direction. And certainly my own career is shaped by those experiences and the people I met that were working on an interesting problem I didn't know anything about, or who were using a set of methods that I thought were really exciting. And you do sort of take a little bit from each of those. And the the other point that you made that I really like was about just the power that we all have, I think, as people who meet lots and lots of students, to encourage them or potentially discourage them if we're careless, right? And if you're not thinking about those interactions, it can be really impactful for people. It's funny how many people go into IO psychology because they had a bad boss. Like, I hear that a lot. Like, oh gosh, this was a bad boss, and that isn't the way we want people to make decisions necessarily about what kinds of futures would be good for them either. While we're on the topic of advice for students, do you have any other advice for students as they embark on their research journey? So definitely the points you're making about relationship building and thinking about impact are really valuable. Are there other things you see students kind of missing out on, or things that are especially important to do early in their careers?
Early in your career, throughout your career, stay curious. Read this kind of goes back to what we were talking about a little earlier, but is read what is being published in the journals, but also stay on top of what is happening in the world. And if we want to do research that is impactful, that makes a difference to the world, we have to really stay connected and get outside our bubble. I like to read comments published in response to a news article, not just the article itself. I learned so much just by seeing unfiltered comments that are made in response to different topics. And then share your ideas with others, have conversations, not with just your professors, but with fellow students as well. And
too, right?
And regular people. The second is load up on methods. I think just about everyone would give that advice. You can't take too many methods in stat classes while in grad school. It's really, really important to have a robust methods toolkit. And the third thing I would say is data management. Really need to be organized. You need to always be thinking about ways to make sure that the methods and the data processing are crystal clear, safely stored, that others have access. Be thinking about this all from a transparency and open science perspective. And my gosh, back up that data in multiple places. We have recently had a case in which some data was lost to the cloud. So it's really important to develop those skills early on And right. And we know as you continue in your career, you have more and more data and more projects, and developing a system to really track all of that in a careful way.
It's so much easier to start with a good system than to try to look backwards and organize your piles and piles of mess later. Wish I had built some of that infrastructure from the beginning. And Richard and I really put a lot of effort in the book into talking about the sort of like logistical, practical things like file naming, because it's the sort of thing that you don't think is important until it is, and then you're really sorry.
Yeah.
We all had to learn the lesson the hard way.
Yeah. Yes, I can just fully agree with. And then you work with people who have different file naming. Like, how many papers can you have that say paper?
Yeah, draft 2. I got a million of them for you. Yeah. And well, I'm sure you get this too, but I often get requests from people for data or measures or things from very old papers, and saying it's on my other computer isn't really good enough. So keeping track of those things in a way that persists over time is even more challenging. I know that the NSF has been struggling with this a lot. Just how can we create persistent data repositories? OSF is a nonprofit; it could vanish. Your own website is not really very robust or sturdy, and so this is not a solved problem in the field, but anything that we can do as individuals is really going to make it slightly better and easier.
Yeah, and I think if we all had really robust data management infrastructure, we could create these shared repositories and open up the data in a way in which it could be beneficial to more researchers and based on stronger samples as well.
We want to ask you one last question, which is there a paper that you've read in the last year that really made an impression on you, or that you're really excited about? Maybe you can tell us about that paper.
So of course I had to pick a PSYCH paper for this. And this was published by Francisco Marino, who's at MSU, and who's someone who I do not know, so there is no bias here. But the paper is Working on an Empty Stomach, How Food Insecurity Impacts Job Performance Through Rumination. And I just love this because it's tackling a really important societal issue. 81 million people globally, 34 million people in the US alone suffer from food insecurity. Not something that I had seen tackled in our journals. In conducting the study, they draw on theory, but they also have some really meaningful practical implications in the roles that organizations can take in addressing the issue. So I thought it was a great example of the type of research I'd like to see more of published in the journal.
Our failure to consider some of these issues might come from a focus on a relatively narrow set of occupations. So it's really great to see the journals embracing that. It gives me a lot of hope.
How do you see what you're doing in relation to the broader field? So it's something that I've struggled with a bit as a journal editor, in that you have a very hands-on control in terms of shaping what kind of research is being published in your journal, but at the same time, there's this more ambiguous touch that you have associated with all of the surrounding sort of research infrastructure. Do you feel like your work with the journal is this a voice in the darkness? Is this something that you feel like it's a rising tide lifts us all, or I don't know? How do you view your relationship with the future of biopsychology?
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying, Richard. And I think it's a heavy lift to try and create any degree of change with our journals. So I think in the case of personnel psychology, as I mentioned, we're trying to create a shift. The way that I've been trying to make that happen is through alignment, like really bringing the whole editorial team in alignment on our mission.
Mm.
And then trying to bring the editorial board into alignment too, because if the reviewers are still using another standard to review papers, we're not going to be able to do what it is that we want to do. So we're getting ready to issue another set of guidelines that are intended for our authors and our reviewers. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that I have 3 years at the journal. That's not very long, especially when you get to this stage of the career. You realize how quickly 3 years can go by. So how can you create a shift that begins with the research that's conducted? And conducting the research takes quite a while. And then submitting it and getting it through the whole revision process. So I'm optimistic that we can execute this shift, but I don't think that I'm naive to the challenge in doing so. And I don't know what you're seeing at your journal, but I am seeing a lot of research that appears to be kind of based on a template. And I would really like to get rid of the templates as I issue a set of guidelines for reviewers. And I think that's part of what we get stuck in these paradigms, and it's hard to shake that off, and it takes time to get any sort of shift.
It's a great point about just, if someone today gets the message and starts a research project, they might not get it to you in time. And that's tough with only a 3-year term. I thought it was 5. That's really short. As far as the template thing, I mean, this is the consequence of people responding to incentives, right? Like if you write a paper that looks like a certain way, historically, everybody thought that was a great paper, whether it was or not. That's incredibly hard to shift unless you can move all the incentives around. I mean, as a journal editor, you do have the power to shift those incentives, but unless everyone else also does, like you're kind of like in tension with those other forces.
So that inspirational piece is a really big one. So my term is 5 years, so I have a little more time than you. But even that seems quite short for trying to deal with some of these longer term patterns that we see in terms of what people what people think is what journals want. That's that incentives piece. I often think about how the journal can and should, and what power I even really have to influence like the new generations. Like, does this become an outlet that they would be able to use for tenure is kind of a weird question to ask yourself, but that's part of it. It's like actually setting up the incentive system so that people will, in the long term, whether we can enact short-term change or not, that in the long term, it can at least change some minds. But yeah, it seems like a pretty ambiguous hope sometimes.
But I also think that, the more we send out, we're doing the special issue that Tara is co-editing. And to me, we want that research, but it's also another way to send out the signal of what type of research that we think should be conducted and what we would like to see published in the journal. So the more we can try and send out these different signals, perhaps, the greater the likelihood that the larger community will pick up on what we're trying to do and get on board with it.
I do think that special issues have a lot of power in sending signals. Like the various special issues that implemented results masked submissions, I think were really powerful in having some journals adopt that as a standard submission type. So certainly getting the idea into people's heads and getting people talking about it has an impact. And if anyone is going to fix things, it's going to be you. So we're putting all our hopes on you, Tammy, to take the field forward. Thanks so much for doing it.
I know that the two of you have been talking about these issues for a long time too. So it's not just any one voice, all of us together that can, try and create this change that I think so many people think is needed. And if we all just keep trying to pull the levers, I think we'll get there.
I think so too. Well, thanks again for your insight and wisdom and for everything you're doing with the journal. We're really just super excited. And we're very honored that we could have you on the gig to talk about your vision. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. And thanks for doing the gig. That's another way that we're using our voices.
That's it for another gig. To stay in touch, subscribe on YouTube, check out our website at thegig.online, join our LinkedIn group, sign up for our email notification list, and join our Discord. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time for another great I.O. get-together.